Hello and welcome, everyone. This is Jumpstarting Your Industry 4.0 Digital Twin and Smart Manufacturing Journey with Hyperautomation. This webinar is sponsored by IBM's Cloud Pak for Business Automation and Salient Process, a Gold Business Partner professional services company. I'm your host, Jimmy Hewitt, but more importantly, let me introduce our featured speakers. First, we have IBM's Chief Technology Officer for Industrial Automation. He has spoken all over the world on this topic and is truly a walking encyclopedia, Dr. Ben Amaba. Next, we have our own business automation strategist with over a decade of successful process automation, engineering, consulting experience. There is truly no business process that he has not or cannot automate. Jeff Ham.
Glad to be here.
I'm looking forward to both of your sections today. And with that, we have a very simple three-part agenda prepared. First, Dr. Ben will talk us through a bit of a historical context, what events brought us to where we are today in the industrial sector, and identify a couple of problems and challenges that our audience may be experiencing today. Next, Jeff will prepare or present a demonstration of IBM's Cloud Pak for Business Automation and how it is solving those problems and challenges. Last but not least, we have a Q&A section, so everyone leaves here with all of their questions and curiosities answered. With that, let's jump right into Ben's section with our first poll. So if everyone could please take 30 seconds to answer the poll on your screen. The question is, which of the following industrial sector trends is your company currently pursuing? Is it Industry 4.0? Is it digital twin? Is it smart manufacturing? Or some combination of the three? Results are coming in. And before we stop the poll, looks like we've got the majority of companies pursuing smart manufacturing standalone, Ben, or a good half standalone smart manufacturing, and the other half a combination of Industry 4.0 and digital twin. The results are changing, but what do you think about these results, Ben? Is this what you're seeing?
Absolutely. We're seeing this around the world, smart manufacturing, because it's very operationalized. It's coming to the forefront, and we'll talk on one of these slides on some of the challenge, but clearly Industry 4.0 and digital twin, a lot of people are making statements about it, but it's still a vision. And I will say, in order to make any of those three happen, vision has to meet pragmatic automation tactics, because I always say also a vision without tactics is a hallucination. Technology without a vision is going to be a hammer looking for a nail, but this is synonymous around the world. In fact, I think it's accelerating.
Great, having a bit of a technical difficulty here as we jump into your first slide, Ben.
No problem at all. Hey, so I really like for the audience, this is such a critical part, and why this venue is so much different than other conversations. A lot of conversations in the past and stuff that I've observed, they never talk about the whole sequence of why we're doing this, how we're doing it, very, very important, about process. And by the way, the how makes 85 to 94% of where you're going to be challenged. And then the what, which you'll see from Jeff. And what he does is put this together. So I'm going to follow this three-step approach, because before you get to the what and the how, you got to know why this is happening. So let's go through why we're in the fourth revolution and what happened in the first three. The first revolution was mechanization, water power. So you know, at 211 degrees, water is hot. At 212 degrees, one degree, water turns into steam, steam turns into power, power drives trains, and trains can take down mountains. That's what, as innovators and people on this call have to do, right? You've got to get that 1 degree of freedom to get beyond just competition. And by the way, in the next 3 to 5 years, 75% of the businesses out there will either be acquired, go bankrupt, or cease to exist because they can't recognize the revolutions and the evolutions as they take place. So let's talk about the second revolution and why it was so important to us. The second revolution was so important because it actually allowed mobility, allowed us to get people around the world, materials around the world, and machinery. We weren't locked in geographically, and that was huge. But let's talk about why the second revolution had to evolve. It took about 80 years to get 90% of mobility around the world. Today, the smartphone took about 5 years to get communications around the world. Why did we have to leave the second revolution to get to the third revolution? Everybody knows the third revolution, and keep this in mind and why the fourth revolution is there. Although we were very good at Moore's law, which allowed us to drive capacity every 18 months and even 6 months, twice the capability, Moore's law was into play. And what were we trying to do? We were trying to use data as a proxy or predictor of materials, machinery, manpower, measurements, and method. So it was very effective. But now here's the fourth revolution. The fourth revolution, or Industry 4.0, is much, much different. And that 1 degree today, this hour, understanding the why, how, and what is going to get you to the fourth revolution. 3 things are different. 1, the technology is just immense. 1, robotic process automation is leading, followed by artificial intelligence, which is symbiotic. And then you hear of the IoT, 3D printing, and blockchain. So how are you going to orchestrate all of that? That's number 1. The second one is called Metcalfe's law. Metcalfe's law says it's not the importance of the third revolution about computer sciences or Moore's law, but it's the ability to connect, right? 1 cell phone. In fact, IBM had a cell phone called Simon in 1991, but I can guarantee you that nobody on this call has a Simon phone, because what did we need? We needed Metcalfe's law to connect the pieces. And the third and final thing that makes Industry 4.0 very important, especially the transition between 3 and 4, are these islands. You cannot go from island to island without some invisible thread called software and automation to connect the islands. So let's talk at the next chart why these islands are actually creating the problem. Everybody's probably got an ERP system. In fact, Moore's law allowed you to have an ERP system at a very negligible cost. But what also happened? People started creating other layers and other dichotomies, the production planning system, demand planning, and then the right-hand side, the columns, the resource planning, right? These are the directors, the vice presidents. So all of a sudden you had a dichotomy in the ERP island, and then you had 2 other islands form, production planning and resource planning. Okay, Moore's law increased again. And what happened here? Managers and directors started creating their own planning system and their rough cut capacity planning system. Wow, that's great. Moore's law did it again. And we created level 4. Then the inventory managers and the people taking inventory on the floor, they started creating their own dichotomies in their island. And last of all, sensors and actuators created this boom. We all have heard it. It's called the Internet of Things, or the Industrial Internet of Things. So although good in Industry 3.0 with Moore's law, it failed to fulfill both Metcalfe's law, connecting the islands, but Moore saw it created a problem. It's called Little's law. As the islands started to drift farther and farther apart, the error rate started drifting farther and farther apart. And this is critical. What is that error rate? So let's take a look at it, because these are the challenges you need to be aware of. Don't do technology for technology's sake. Understand the why, the how, and the what. And here's the why in Industry 3.0. A lot of us have over 900 applications, even if you had 200, with only 29 to 30% of them connected or bridged. Very difficult problem. That means you don't know which data is correct on which island. Let's look at the second point. John Nesbitt said, we are flooded with information, but we lack knowledge. And why is that? Reports are taking much too long. Reports that today through automation can take me hours, if not minutes, Generally, it's a manual effort for most of us and can take months to years. By the time you get that report out and COVID-19 changes or the Suez Canal changes, you're actually operating or taking action on an outdated plan. And what's scary about this, your knowledge workers are sometimes overburdened and overworked because they're just searching for the island. They're just searching for the bridge, and they're just searching for the data. That means they have information, but they don't have knowledge to operate. Here's the problem. Personnel. We can barely find personnel, yet we're using our personnel for non-value activity. We're using every Friday as an analogy to repeat Monday through Thursday. Why would we do that? So we're using 24% of our time in Groundhog Day. We have got to get out of the cycle of Groundhog Day. Now, if you want to stay in that cycle and repeat the horrors as well as the mistakes, that is, you become 75% of the business that will either be acquired, go out of business, or claim bankruptcy. And we've seen the studies. So with that, I'd like to move to the next chart, because this is very important. What Jeff is going to talk about. We've talked about the why, the how, now the what. What is really going to happen? So Jeff, with that, I think we've got the basis to actually prove something. I want to close with one quote, Jerry Rice. What you're doing today, I will do today what others refuse to do today, so I can do tomorrow what others can't. So Jeff, take us on the next journey.
Thanks, Ben. I appreciate it. That was great. I love that Groundhog's Day. You said if you want to stay in it, I think we've all seen the movie. It's not an ideal situation, right? But yeah, so as Ben mentioned, these legacy systems of Industry 3.0, they leave pretty big gaps, right? Due to the fact that a lot of these technologies are quite siloed, right? So the question, I think, is who's left to pick up that slack? And the answer is either this person, right? Or this being a human, or another option, their digital twin. So I do want to just kind of level set on the terminology here. And actually, Jimmy, if we can just go to the next slide, what is a digital twin? And I can keep this super simple. So a digital twin is just, it's really a virtual representation of a real world thing. So, that could be a process, that could be an object, that could be a person. And actually what we're focusing on today is digital twin in the context of a worker. So, we have real world workers who do things. We focus on digital automation. So they might do things like reading and sending emails, filling out forms, compiling reports, creating documents, heaven forbid data entry, but often data entry. And with our software, we can create these digital workers that can do all the same things on a human's behalf. So I want to kind of hop right in here to the demo. So I'm going to share my screen.
Yes, actually, okay. If we could, Jeff, our second and final poll.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Just before we jump into the demonstration, to poll the audience should be popping up now. Everyone, please, before we start with our demo, take 30 seconds to answer the second poll question, which is, with regards to digital labor and hyperautomation that Jeff and Ben are talking about, what is your company's largest barrier to entry? Is it a skills gap or lack of expertise, this being somewhat of a new technology? Is it fear of losing one's job to a digital worker? Is it not perceiving a need for it? Or finally, budget or conflicting priorities? Take another couple seconds to vote. And we've got about half in. Another couple seconds. And we'll go ahead and stop the polling there. There you have it, Jeff. It looks like the largest barrier to entry is conflicting priorities, with about half coming in. Budget / conflicting priorities. And other honorable mentions are not perceiving the need or a skills gap, lack of expertise. So maybe use that as context as you jump into your demonstration, which the floor is yours for.
Yeah, sure. Let me share my screen real quick. We can, I think you need host disabled screen sharing.
There you go.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, so let's talk through this. So, I want to make this as specific to the industrial market as possible. And as such, Ben and I have collaborated on a use case. So let's actually start with a scenario. So I think right now you guys can see my screen. We're looking at a material planning process. And this is inside of IBM BlueWorks Live, which is our documentation and modeling tool. So a process modeling tool. What we're looking at here is a current state process. So here we see a plant manager. This is something they're doing daily or maybe weekly, pulling a production plan, pulling the required materials, comparing those plans to see if they are in alignment. If they are in alignment, then great. Maybe we just come back tomorrow or next week to check back, on some future weeks. Otherwise, maybe they're out of alignment. Maybe we, are over capacity or under capacity. We have either a surplus issue or a slack issue. If we're under capacity, there's a lot more to that too. And you can see we'll kind of keep drilling down into this process so we can kind of touch on some of the complexities. First of all, the plant manager is going to have to determine the root cause. So it's been mentioned, right? The 4 M's, right? There's material, machine, man, and method. So if this is, due to some sort of material shortage, maybe we need to go ahead and order some new materials. If it's due to machinery, maybe we need to request new machinery, or maybe there's some maintenance that needs to happen on existing machinery. If we're having a labor shortage, maybe we can create a job posting. And then a shameless plug here, but if it's a problem with method, you want to call salient process, obviously. So this is our current state process, right? So we're gonna in a second leave the BlueWorks tool, and we'll actually see how we would do this. But I want to talk a little bit about what the future state is, so we can also kind of know what we're driving towards here in today's demo. So I've flipped over to the future state material planning process. So it's looks very similar, right? The biggest difference is I've now added IBM automation. So, what used to be an entirely manual process, kind of cross-pollinating these Industry 3.0 systems, is now happening automatically with IBM automation. So we'll still start, in some sort of daily or weekly, but instead of having a human come in and pull this production plan, pull this capacity plan and compare them, this is something we can do with IBM automation. We can then determine if it's in alignment or not. If it's under capacity, we can also automate decision making. So we can do some root cause analysis. We can determine, what the root cause of this capacity issue is, right? If it's labor related, we can go ahead and generate a task. We can bring that plant manager back in to create a job posting. If it's material related, we can order materials, and we can actually dive even deeper and have the system go ahead and do something like pull vendor pricing, even determine auto approval. So, I mentioned some of these kind of decision automations as well. So we can, and if I look at this here, you can see, for the different material types, for instance, if it's wood, and, we look at wood in units of 1,000 board feet. If it's under 700 per unit, maybe we can automatically approve that. If it's a metal, if it's a sheet and it's under 50, we can automatically approve that. So we can even start to automate some of this decision-making inside of this process, so that we're truly only involving humans when they need to be involved. We can also order the materials systematically. We can generate emails. All of this stuff we're going to see today. So that's kind of the use case we're looking at, right? So starting with a completely manual process and getting it to a point where there's only 2 human touch points, if at all, right? There could be a lot of, it's data driven, but there could be a lot of situations where humans don't need to be involved at all, right? This could be just straight through processing as we kind of do the work between these systems, or in between these islands, has been kind of described them. So let's look quickly at some of these systems. So I've got a production forecast system here. Okay, so here I can see for the various weeks going forward, I've got 3 products that we're making, right? Product 1, 2, and 3. I've got an expected units. This is how many, either orders or what we expect to produce over the coming weeks. I've also got my materials over here as far as the availability. So this is what we expect to come in based on the shipments. So you can see, like with wood and stone, for instance, it looks like these things are coming in at the same time. Metal's a little off cycle, but what we can't tell easily from this is, how many materials we actually need to fulfill these different production outputs, right? And even including labor hours. So, to emulate that kind of industry 3.0 conundrum where we have several different modules with access to different data, I have another material lookup module here where I can actually come in, type this, these different products, look them up and get a breakdown of, what are they composed of? How many units of wood does it take to produce product 1? How many units does it take to produce product 2? So product 2 has no wood, but if we're trying to, compare these things, you can see how this would be a pretty arduous task, and it's going to take a lot of time. There's quite a bit of calculation involved behind the scenes. So what we're going to look at today, we're going to let a bot basically do this on our behalf. Before I start that, I want to show you just one more thing, which is the process portal. So this is the end user experience for this platform. So we can see the different tasks in our work queue. So we're going to just keep this open because after this bot executes, after it, looks at these, does the material lookups, after it looks at the forecast, determines if we have shortages or if we don't, it'll generate some tasks for us if we need to be involved. So let's go ahead and run this, but we'll keep an eye on this portal. We should see some tasks pop up here in a second. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna start my bot, and you can see, my cursor's just there. I'm a hands-off keyboard right now. So this bot is basically just working on my behalf, right? So it's opening up that forecast, and it'll go through, it'll do the material lookups, and it'll run all the numbers, and it'll determine, if we're gonna have enough of these materials to produce the expected outputs, including labor. So moves pretty quick. You blink and you might miss it, but we've now executed that task bot. I think now we should have, some tasks coming in here. So we now have a task to create job posting, and we also have a task to review the wood order. So if I look at what the system figured out, right? I've got expected labor hours, 1,720 hours that we're expecting based on just the staffing currently. But to fulfill these orders, I'm gonna need 1,800 hours, right? So there's a shortage, which is why we're, creating a task to potentially consider maybe hiring on new resources. Same with metal, right? We see that we're expecting only 250 units, but we'll need 400 to fulfill that order or those orders. Stone looks good, wood, 100 short, right? So as a result of this, as a result of that IBM Automation's analysis, we created a job posting task because, we either need to hire on more people or, we won't be able to hit those targets. And then also there's a review wood order as well. Now also the metal piece, there's a shortage there as well, but that's not showing up here. And that's because that was actually, you got an email just now, that was actually auto approved, right? Because it was underneath the threshold, the order of the the unit price was below the threshold of $50. So this order was automatically placed, right? So, we're just starting to kind of take away these little pieces of this process that don't add any value, that are monotonous. So let's actually look at what some of these user experiences look like also. So if I come in here to review this wood order, and actually in terms of this platform, we don't even call these user interfaces, we call them coaches. And the thought there is that they're supposed to coach a user through what they have to do at that particular time. So it's a lot different kind of philosophy than something like an ERP where you just have all this data and not a lot of instruction. As a matter of fact, sometimes it's very difficult to understand what it is you're supposed to do or how to do it. So in this interface, I can see that the task was generated because none of the vendors have any available wood underneath the price threshold. And I don't know if any of you guys have kept up with the news, but this probably isn't shocking. I can see that I need 600 units of wood and, or that I have, yeah, I need 600. I should have 500. So I need to order 100. I can see the unit prices. So actually the system went through and actually pulled prices from a couple different vendors. So we're really just kind of reintroducing this or bringing the humans back into play whenever, it's something that requires some human discretion. So here, for instance, wood for cheap is an $88 unit price. So that's, much higher than the others. However, it's also expected to ship the soonest. Lumberjacks, on the other hand, is a $72 unit price, but we're not, that ship date's pushed out to August. So if we're looking at a weekend, July 2nd, that's probably not going to work for us. So maybe we want to go with Home Factory Express, get it a few days later, but $10 off unit price. Or maybe we don't want to make a decision here at all, right? So I kind of made the analogy that this work queue is like an email inbox in a way. I can not do anything with that task and it'll just sit there, and that way I can kind of keep track of it. I know I need to do something eventually. I can come back to that. I can, ask a team member. We can figure out how we want to address this shortage and, spike in cost. So let's quickly go over to this create job posting task. So this is a different user interface, right? Here we're potentially bringing on a new resource. So we need to come up with a job title, a salary range, and a job description. And I actually have a job description right here. So, maybe I want to take this document. We're looking for a highly capable, and as I mentioned earlier, I hate data entry. So maybe this would be a good time to lean on a little bit of OCR. So maybe we can just drag that PDF and let IBM Automation do the work and extract that for us. So we can just get this moved on straight to HR as quickly as possible and hopefully find a resource to address that labor shortage. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what we just saw, right? So we saw some task automation in the upfront, working between these desktop apps or these Industry 3.0 applications to pull the data, and then we pass that over to other parts to make, some decision automation. What is the root cause of this? What actions need to be taken? Whether that be man, material, machine, method. The system in this instance determined that it was both man and material. So we created a job posting due to the labor shortage. And then with the material, we pulled vendor pricing for the metal. We were able to auto approve that, and the order was submitted automatically. For the wood, we had to bring in a human as the price was above the threshold. So, we're really looking at this exact process in the current state would have been 8 manual steps for a plant manager. And 3 of those would be happening every week regardless, right? Or every day, however often we actually, begin this process. So by leaning into IBM Automation, we've effectively taken that from 8, where 3 of which happen every single time, to 2, which are 100% discretionary, right? They don't necessarily happen every time. They only happen as needed. Okay, let's see. So maybe we could, Jimmy, pull back up the slides if that works.
Yep. Jeff, you may need to make me a host.
Oh, yeah, one sec. There we go.
Yep. Okay, that was the demonstration. Yep. Thanks so much, Jeff. You showed what the process that the plant managers go through before automation and how much minutia and monotony they deal with every day. And then you showed how IBM's automation platform automates almost all of those steps. So let's jump into the Q&A section here. And as we wait for our first, here, actually, Jeff, I'll let you wrap up your section here with the direct operations.
I know we're with time. Do we have, another 15? Do we want to maybe go, we can go just to the Well, yeah, I can touch on this quickly. So, the demo we just looked at, right? I mean, this is involving direct operations. So I think an important thing to remember with IBM Automation is that it also addresses indirect operations. So, maybe you are a company where your direct operations are quite streamlined, and your indirect operations need to catch up. That's a whole kind of another piece of the use case pool, I guess, where these technologies are very effective. And that could be things like finance or IT. I think we touched briefly on HR, but, or even things like service requests or maintenance. So the applications of these technologies is very wide. But, direct or indirect, and I think we can just go to the next slide if that works. Yeah, there's a little indirect operations trying to catch up. And then read the revenue slide, next one. So yeah, direct or indirect, we can apply these technologies to maximize revenue per employee. So by removing these mundane tasks that aren't adding value, we free people up to engage in more value-adding activities. And these are really the kind of things that humans do best and like to do. Things like, designing better products or improving processes, or as the slide calls attention to, creating better experiences for your customers. There's a stat down there in the bottom, which, I don't think I need to repeat. It's very similar to what Ben was saying, right? I mean, there's a lot of stuff we're doing that is just repeat work or really doesn't need to be done at all, especially by a human. And this is sort of the premise of hyperautomation, right? Which is essentially this notion that everything that can be automated should be, right? And this is not something that just I or Jimmy care about. Hyperautomation is actually, Gartner had it as the top 10 technology trends of 2021. So it is something that, is on a lot of people's radar. And if it's something that I think that if, you don't get ahead of, you could be losing out. It's also something that our platform can help you achieve. Okay, so maybe we can go to the next slide.
Consider this the Q&A section. Team. So the Q&A is open at the bottom. You should see a widget to click in and type your questions. As we wait for those to come in, let's keep talking about that, Jeff. Our audience may not know what they don't know in terms of there is a better way of working. There is a new way of working. Digital twins are possible, but on the other hand, there's a large amount of fear of losing their job, to put it bluntly, that we run into a lot. So what would you say to folks in the audience that are struggling with this idea of, man, I do feel these pains that you and Dr. Amaba have been talking about. There is a lot of minutia and monotony in my daily tasks. And just seeing this demonstration opens my eyes to, there is a new way of working. I can spend my time on higher value tasks, but I don't want to lose my job. So it's this torn sensation happening that our audience may be going through. What do you say to folks that are torn on this topic?
Well, I don't really view it that way. I mean, I don't view it as a, computer or human. I mean, I think these things coexist, and they've coexisted for years. I mean, it's just a better way of doing it. It's the next step. It's the evolution, right? I mean, like for instance, if I think people were afraid to adopt computers, in the 90s or something, or late 80s or whatever, due to fear of losing a job, they would have not had a company to work for at all, right? So, I mean, there's a balance, right? I mean, you have to stay competitive. You have to be, but I think that these technologies enable humans to be more effective. And that's like, I think the slide is showing, right? I mean, that you can maximize, you can achieve a higher revenue per employee. These automation tools support their human counterparts. They make them do better, Yeah,
and going off that, one question is, speaking of labor, what are your thoughts on the ongoing labor shortages that you've been seeing in the news? Companies not even being able to find the amount of workers that they need to just stay afloat.
Right. Well, that's sort of, to kind of bring that back to your previous question, maybe that's about as good of opportunity as ever to, invest in automation. Definitely no job loss there. I think that automation can play can serve as a real good bridge for some, once again, you're making the employees you already have more impactful, so they can take on maybe more workload and, alleviate some of that pain that the labor shortage may be causing.
We saw a use case in Australia, a company called Woodside Energy that actually automated. It's not just removing the task, but it's actually collecting tribal knowledge and seeing the variance of that tribal knowledge. So automation isn't just about moving things. It's also about collecting tribal knowledge.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Changing your standard operating procedure, both administrative and operational. But I was walking through the neighborhood today, and actually a CEO of a company came up to me and goes, you know what, just out of the blue, we are going to automate. And I was curious, well, why do you say that? It was about the employees, about the tribal knowledge, about actually reporting what they're doing. And I thought this was going to be a Fortune 3 company because he's talking about automation. It is a local restaurant because they can't find employees. So if those individuals are looking at automation as a competitive advantage or a critical area to survive, then you need to look at it. Now, what's interesting about this restaurateur as well as Woodside Energy, the next question, right, is if we all believe on this call that there's some form of automation, which I think I heard from the poll, there's a conflict of interest, or where do I start? Salient and IBM said, let's address this. And what we'll do, just for the audience members, how do you address this, right? I've got different priorities, and it's about money, measurements, materials, methods, personnel. How do I rearrange these islands that I can travel to the island that we want? We've adopted something called discovery and design thinking. And Jeff is part of this with Jimmy. We'll actually elaborate, because at the end of the day, to avoid this conflict versus not moving at all, is you create a feasibility diagram through automation. And you say, what's important to me and what can I really do? Because these conflicts generally aren't overlapped as much as people think. Once you do, quote unquote, a feasibility diagram, or most people may call it in the industrial sector, a Kano analysis, K-A-N-O, it becomes very apparent, where should I automate and where should I actually put critical thinking skills of my people to the right areas. But without removing some of these non-value activities, you've got a disparate action and conflict to actually move forward. So that's what I would recommend. And Jimmy's probably going to talk about the actions and some of the products we've already done to see things at Woodside Energy, all the way down to a restaurateur.
Yeah, and it's no different from what has been happening in the industrial manufacturing sector for the last 20, 30 years since Toyota introduced Kaizen and the Lean Six Sigma methods to the direct operations. But now that those direct operations have been essentially fully automated, what about the supporting processes? What about the capacity planning processes? What about the data going in and out of SAP, JD Edwards? What about the forecasting spreadsheets that are being pulled and analyzed? Why is 40% of our day's tasks, what we're doing with our time, automatable? And where do we start? So yes, to your point, Ben, Salient has created a, we'll call it an accelerator that helps our clients plan and prioritize their different automation initiatives. So not just based on ROI or straight time savings or time repurposing, but there could be different factors like sponsorship or alignment to corporate initiatives and strategies. It could be prioritized to the top of the list because it's contained within one department, and that would be easier to achieve a win and start that virtuous cycle of use case 1 paying for use case 2 and 3. So that platform that we've built is called the Automation Compass, and it's a great starting point to kick off and jumpstart your company's automation journey. Let's see. There's one other question, and it looks like it's a current event question for Ben. Why don't you take this one? What has been happening at Ford with regards to the chip shortage? And how does what you are talking about here today relate to that?
Absolutely. Ford and the auto companies around the world ran into a chip shortage. And by the way, it was Before that, it was actually materials, the rare earth elements, because there was actually debate in Greenland to get rare earth elements. So that chip shortage is there. In fact, it's close to billions of dollars of these, not only Ford, but several manufacturers out there that were unable to do three things that they should have automated, just as validation and verification. So what auto companies doing today to prevent this, what I call VUCA, right? The volatility, the uncertainty, the chaos. They're going to do three things with automations. They're going to try to collect the parameters, see the issue before it's coming, trying to be less stochastic, but deterministic. The second thing they're going to do for automation, they're going to try to automate the decision process that Jeff actually depicted on a real live tool that users can use. That's the second one. The third one they're going to do with automation is then finally act. So not only are they going to use automation strictly for acting, they're going to use it to collect parameters. They're going to use it to actually analyze things and then act. If you don't go through all three threads, it's almost impossible to actually do the right things the right way at the right time. And I will see that we're already seeing it in electronics, telco, and even again, the restaurateur. So that's what they're doing in automation. And again, like Jeff alluded to, its surfacing is the number one area for the supply chain, operations, health and safety, especially if you have service personnel, and even capital acquisitions. You'll see almost $50 billion earmarked for electronics manufacturers just in the US alone. But that's a great question, Jimmy.
Yeah, like I said, the walking encyclopedia. I hope that answered the question. And with a minute or two left in the webinar today, I just wanted to take a moment to thank everyone for attending, but also let me urge our audience who had just spent the last 45 minutes with us learning about these challenges, learning about these problems. Maybe you're sitting there in your chair right now or watching the recording, and you have felt a similar pain that Jeff walked through during his demonstration. If that is the case, take action. The worst thing, here's a QR code on the screen today. This is actually a link to our calendar where you can meet with us and talk about, what you thought about this webinar, and we can go through some processes, some solutions that we've done for similar clients. But there's two things that could happen if you scan this QR code and meet with us. The first is either we prove that we can help you, or we prove that you already are doing all the right things. So it really is a win-win. We hope you took something away from this webinar, and we hope to meet with you soon. Thanks again, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Take care.